right, well, hey.
Let me see here. Doing cool. All right, can everybody hear the sound of my voice?
Yes.
Excellent. This has already started well. So, my name is Ryan Shining. I am just representing a team of people who are all here dispersed through the audience strategically. So there's also Marilyn Triardo, and there they are over there. Two other team members, Samia Pudraka and Luciano Rosera. So we have put together a game demo for CGSA this year, but we also wanted to do a presentation, and I think by we, sometimes I mean me. So I am going to give a more spoiler-free walkthrough of what we were trying to do with this game, and I invite all of you to come out afterwards, if it's right after this, so I'll be able to see you walking away, avoiding eye contact and trying to escape, and we would love for you to come and play. However, if you can't, you can follow us on Twitter, nagasaki_kitty, and we are going to be putting the game live onto our website, nagasaki-kitty.ca. All right, so what is Nagasaki-Kitty? Right now, it is an iterative project, and the first version is a blind version. So the game is about a little girl named Ayako, who is in Nagasaki the day that the atomic bomb is dropped. The player's goal is to get Ayako home as she looks for her mother, and I'm going to leave it there because I don't want any spoilers or any ruining of that part of it. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we conceptualized the game, where the idea came from, what we're trying to do with it, a little bit about the design process, and then what we want to do in the future as we move forward. So this project actually started out as a paper that I was writing for a course. I was doing a historical monuments course. It was as interesting as it sounds. And the goal at the end of the course was that we had to create a plan of, like, if we were going to build a monument to something, what would we build, where would we put it, how would we go about doing that? My training is partially in communication studies and partially in history, so I am very interested in Japanese World War II history, particularly American and Japanese relations during that time. So the thing that I thought would be interesting was to look at World War II monuments, and then I had to get smaller and smaller, and eventually I started to look at monuments to the bombs. So when it came time to do my final project, I said, all right, I want to do a monument. I would do a monument to victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I would put it in North America because that's something that doesn't exist. And when I thought about this, I thought, what North American city would actually want that? There's a lot of problems there, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought it would be good to do something that is more ephemeral, and because I like video games, that's where the project went from there. Eventually, I ended up giving a micro talk at New Console's MLab, and people were interested in it. We joined into a team and then got some funding and decided to make this game. So, when it comes to the historiography, I won't go deeply into it, but I like this quote that I have here, and it is: the only American memorials to Hiroshima and Nagasaki are to the victimizers, not the victims, and there is no debate. This is written by Richard H. Miniar in 1995. 1995 is important. It's the 50-year anniversary of not only the dropping of the atomic bombs, but also of the end of World War II. So when I read this was something that I think a lot of North Americans don't conceive of the end of the war as being through the eyes of victims. It's a very common way to think about wars. You think about the way that it's been taught to you in schools, the way that it is talked about in media, and when it comes to the atomic bombs, I think Mignard hits it on the head very thoroughly, that when Americans talk about the bombs, they talk about what he calls the bookends of the war. So Pearl Harbor is on one side, atomic bombs are on the other. Conceiving of the war in this way allows Americans to think of the war as being justified. They started it, we ended it, everything is fine. This was the sorts of questions that I wanted to address as we tried to make a game. So what I want to stress with this is that this is a monument for North American audiences. Nobody on the team conceives of this as speaking for Japanese victims or survivors known as bakusha. We're not speaking for or to or with. I conceive of it as being more like Trim and Ha's idea of speaking nearby. Something that we are engaged in this and we know a little bit about it and we have something to say, but we're not trying to be the definitive statement on this. We're trying to open a dialogue and to show that there are other ways of thinking about the war. So, all of these issues obviously are very hard to navigate. But then when you try and do it within a game, it just confounds that and makes it that much harder. So, we have multiple design influences and philosophies. I, for this game, am the writer and the director. So I wrote the original Twine version of it based on my historical research, and then my direction was me giving ideas and being told how they can actually be made to work. So it's like, I think we should do this. No, that won't work. This is how we need to do it. And then I gave the thumbs up, and we went from there. So when it comes to source material, there's lots of different background readings that I wanted to use. The one that I think was most important, most influential to me, was Heihachi Kyoko's Two Grave Markers. Heihachi Kyoko is a hibakusha, a survivor of the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. And the story is about two girls who are caught in a factory at the time. And it's about them trying to leave Nagasaki and what happens from there. Once again, I don't want to give any spoilers about this. This is a very good story. It's one of the few that is actually translated into English. And if you want to know more about the bombs, I think that this is a very good starting point for it. The reason that I liked it so much is it has one of the more, I'm going to use the term, visceral depictions of early radiation sickness. This was one of the things that really made me start to think about the atomic bombs in a different way when I was doing my own historical research. So this, the source material, of course, being the story, the way that we ended up using that within the game is that it provided a framework, an influence for the story and the plot. It gave me an idea of how to try and write within the genre, but obviously these sorts of things change when you're using Twine. I can't write a short story in Twine. I have to write it so that it will fit into the system well. I used a lot of historiography and theory for this. This is more my background, is the historiography. So this was a lot of going through different historical documents, going through medical records that have been translated. A lot of these things are available in English rather than Japanese because it was the Americans who were doing the most research at the time, and they were also censoring a lot of Japanese research. So going through this and trying to find as many things as possible that I thought would be important for people to see became a very big part of this for me. We used a lot of historical documents and photos. This was actually one of the harder parts here because we wanted to try and be accurate with the drawings that we were using as much as possible, particularly when it came to what the characters should be wearing, how they should look, with a lot of things with the setting as well. Something that I found out very early on in writing the art direction is it's very to a game. I needed to decide why I thought this should be a game instead of a story or a paper or a PowerPoint or any number of different things, and how we wanted to actually design this in a way that it would be playable and it would have this like ludic sense to it. This actually became very hard because we knew very early on that we didn't want to have combat in the game, and we also didn't want this to be like a survival style game where you're going and picking up a bunch of items and crafting and these sort of things. So we needed to find ways of making that work. What we ended up doing was there is an algorithm that determines something that I won't tell you about for spoiler purposes that is happening in the background of every slide that you are going through. The algorithm is pushing you towards one of the endings. I can't remember how many endings there are offhand, which is bad because I wrote this. I think there's 6 or 7 different endings, and the game itself, we decided to make very short, or I guess I decided to make very short, and they agreed with me. And so it can be completed within a minute sometimes, depending if you make a certain decision. But I thought this was important as well because I wanted, even though the story is only about one little girl. I wanted there to be many endings to all the different things that happened in that time. So as an example of this, we have, when it came to the design processes, I guess there was three things that we were trying to design: story, art, and algorithm. The story, as I said, I'm very heavily influenced by Hibakusha literature and reading these different accounts. That was my introduction to the content, and it was something that I wanted to engage with. I didn't want to sit down and just kind of write this story based only on historical documents, but I wanted to have as much of the two as possible. What I have here is I took a very non-spoilery and probably the most boring picture that we have in the game. There's one that's more boring, but it's literally just black from smoke, so it wouldn't look like anything, but I took this. So this was an example of how we tried to use historical photographs. And I know that the photo on the right is blurry, and that is part of the point. It was very hard to find a lot of this. It may not be even visible to you. The man on the right, I believe that photograph is taken from Hiroshima 2 days after the bomb, but he's drinking from a water pipe. There's a water pipe that is sticking out of the ground, and he's just bent down and drinking out of this water pipe. So this is an example of me writing "destroyed city" and then having to find more things that could actually be drawn and shown. So when it came to the art, we tried to use a lot of photographs to make it as, I don't like the word authentic because that's something that gets thrown around in games, but to make it as true or close as we could to the things that were going on at the time. So with the story and the art done, that's where we decided to put an algorithm into the game. Having the algorithm we thought was important for gamifying. Once again, another term that I'm not a huge fan of, but in this case, we wanted there to be something that made this a game, that made people engage with it in a little bit of a different way. As I said before, this project is iterative. After we have funding for the first version that we did, ideas for a second version will be another Twine version that we are hoping to translate into Japanese. This was something that we debated about having in this first version for CGSA, but was something that ultimately we didn't do because of time constraints. And if we're going to do this Japanese translation, we really do want to do it right. And trying to make that work in Twine is a little bit different because it's not just, I can't just send this text to somebody and say, translate this for me. We need someone who can translate, but then also help us put it into the engine so they can read it, say that it makes sense in the way that it's designed and is readable and these sorts of things. So the second iteration, which might be more of a 1.5 iteration, will be including a Japanese translation if we can. Future iteration, the final iteration, I like the word iteration, I'm just going to keep showing that. We are going to work with 3D models, and we have one that we're showing here. So this is what Ayako is going to look like in our last version. This is just obviously very preliminary stuff. I think it looked great. Our 3D modeler doesn't like it and told me not to show the pictures, but I'm doing it anyway. So we have a close-up of Ayako, we have the sandals close-up, and then we have the model sheet here, and the clothing. So once again, this is all based on historical photographs that we could find, historical documents, and trying to go through and recreate as much as possible. So, in conclusion, please come and see our game. If you don't have time to see the game, we are going to be putting it live very soon. I don't know if it's live right. Is it live right now? No. All right, it's not live right now. We're going to be putting it live on the website. It'll be fully playable through HTML, optimized to be on a desktop or a laptop. It can run on a tablet or a cell phone, but with the way that the text works, and we're using a black and white art style, sometimes they'll go over top of each other, so it functions, but it's not optimized for that. Thank you for your time.